Hello everyone, so I'm recording this video in support of this article which I recently wrote, as well as the source code which I recently written for test automation framework. And the motivation behind this is to help the beginners as well as few mid senior level test automation engineers uh, to know what kind of components a test automation framework should have or must have, as well as what kind of tools and libraries we can make use of to make or implement these components with ease. So that is the purpose of this video, as well as this article, as well as the source code which I have written. Now, before I move forward, I also would like to highlight a very good framework which we have already, and it's called a Serenity Framework, which actually has all the useful components a framework should have. So there's no point of recreating a framework when you already have it. No point of re-engineering already solved problems. The Serenity Framework already solves most of the problems which usually a typical test automation framework developer might face. So we already have it. Just in case if you don't want to make use of Serenity BDD, maybe you can hear this conversation, this video, as well as read this article source code. But my recommendation still would be you can go ahead and make use of Serenity BDD. If you're not very aware about it, you can, I put a link here. I'll even open it and show you that. So this is where the documentation for this Serenity BDD is located. You go through it. It provides support for, it has a very good reporting mechanism, very good rich APIs for handling Selenium related operations, as well as it also supports API automation, and hell lot of things is present here. But today this video is not about Serenity BDD, so I'll move back to this article and the framework, which, or template framework I should say, which I have created. I'll try to explain that. Now, what we have, the problem which we usually face, the typical problem. So I'll think in perspective of a beginner who is trying to create a framework and where he should be starting. What is the point, or what is the problems he should be solving when he would be creating a test automation framework? So first and foremost, he need to make sure, or he need to first decide what to use, a Cucumber based or simple TestNG based. And my recommendation here would be Cucumber, which I'm going to talk about in a while. For now, I'm just narrating the problems or the decisions which you have to take. So first, Cucumber or simple TestNG. Of course, you won't use JUnit at all. So you will use Cucumber or simple TestNG. And right now I'm talking about Java platform, not talking about any other platforms, languages like Python or JavaScript. I'm only talking about Java right now. So either you will make use of Cucumber if you want to go to a PDD paradigm, or you can simply use TestNG. It's something which you have to decide first. Then how will you manage the driver, and where should you keep it? How you will initialize the driver, and how you will destroy it, and who controls it is what you need to think. Then should I be using dependency injection frameworks, and which is an important concept if you're using Cucumber, because Cucumber is not, I would say, as rich as TestNG in terms of the functionality which TestNG provides. But dependency injection is a very, very, very important concept when you are moving towards Cucumber, and I will come to that in a while. What you should do for reporting, which is always the concern for any test automation framework, how your reporting should look like. And there are different ways a reporting could be implemented. There could be centralized server where all the logs will be located, and it will retain the results for a longer period, and you can have a utility which will generate the report on demand. That requires, of course, infrastructure support from the infrastructure team of your project, because you just can't have a server spinned up for yourself in a real enterprise level setup. But in this framework, I'll not go there. I'll simply talk about how to generate a report, which will be less intrusive in the sense you shouldn't be writing too much code to generate the report. A good reporting framework should generate the report for yourself, something similar to what TestNG does or Cucumber default reports does. So that is what I mean by reporting here. What you should do for logging, which is different than reporting. Reporting is a high level concept. Logging is a low level concept. You go to your log files when something goes wrong. So you always have to make sure that whatever your framework is doing, it is logging information, which method is going, what it's doing, so that when things go wrong, you can go back to your log files to see what happened. How will you achieve parallel execution, which is a very, very important concept. And this has to be, I mean, the mistake which people make is, let's make framework first and then parallel execution concept, we'll think about it later. Later, once your project scale, you're definitely going to need the parallel execution. Sometimes it's too late to implement parallel execution into the original design of your framework, because you have made use of something which is making parallel execution difficult. So parallel execution is something which you have to make sure from the very day one, the first test script when you write, which is very important for faster feedback loop, because nowadays it's not only when you talk about CI/CD or DevOps culture. In the CI/CD pipeline, previously the concept was we'll only run smoke pack in CI/CD, but it's no longer the demand. The demand is that you should be able to run the complete regression pack with each CI/CD pipeline, which is doable considering the infrastructure and considering the resources which we are made available to us in the real time setup. So we have to keep parallel execution idea in mind since the very beginning. Then configuration files, which is again a very important concept in any test automation framework, or rather in any project or any kind of software which you have. Configuration plays a very important role, and if it even talk about that 12 talk about the 12 factor application concept, even there is an important principle there about configuration, which says your application should be configurable, that you should not be making any change within the code, and it should be managed from a configuration file. So you have to make sure whatever is supposed to be changing, you should not be making it, or should not be part of your code. It should be part of the configuration file. And when that happens, you have to design your configuration files to hold information, and you need to find a good way of handling it. And configuration file are not always the properties file. Now the new templates are in place, new libraries, new way of handling the configuration. So the latest of them is YAML. Property files, of course, there. Few projects also manage it using JSONs, but we will, in this case, we'll only talk about properties. I can also show about how you can handle it using YAML file. But more or less, this framework, this template which I've created, takes care about or is designed around the configuration file with extension as .properties, and how we can, what library we can use to handle it more efficiently is what I'm going to talk about. Now, how will I be able to perform cross browser test execution, which again is a problem, because when you have to execute it, your test pack on multiple browsers, there are two aspects to it. One, your framework has to be designed in such a way so that you can configure it on what browser it needs to be executed on. Secondly, you also need to have a right infrastructure. And when I say right infrastructure, I'm actually talking about Selenium Grid, which helps you in executing your test cases onto multiple browsers that do parallel in a concurrent fashion. Last not the least is how you will be updating the test status in test management tools like X-Ray or Zephyr. So this is what I haven't implemented it in this framework, but this also is a very important consideration, and many projects are actually demanding it. The stakeholders, the management actually want a centralized location for all their test artifacts, and this also is an important consideration when you actually design your framework. Now in this template, I have not included this as well. For this, I am going to create a separate library as well as separate video to explain how you can do that from your test framework, but that is actually in future for as an extension over this template. So it is not part of today's discussion. Now I've already talked about the problem statements, more or less the high level problem statements, the consideration which you have to take care in mind before you design it. Now here are my proposals. First and foremost, use existing libraries. So my take is always, don't try to write your own logic when there is something existing which you can just make use of. So use existing libraries, and when you do that, and rather when you not do it, you have to write logic on your own. When you write more logic, that means you can introduce more bugs. So general idea is don't reinvent the wheel. Now, what are the libraries which you can make use of? All right, so I have listed these 5 libraries which I'm making use of in this framework. I'll walk you through this as well in the code in a while. So first and foremost, Lombok, which is a very, very important library for all the getter setters needs. You can create, inject getter setters, inject log4j statements, inject builders, because there can be cases in your framework where you have to create the object, a complex piece of object. When that has to be created, you have to do this in a more of a builder pattern format. You have to implement builder pattern. For implementing builder, you have to write builder methods inside all your classes, which is again a painstaking task. And Lombok comes with a very good annotation for it, which you can make use of to create generate automatic builders, which you can make use of to create complex objects. Which again, builder is not, I'm not going to explain builder in this template, but I'm just explaining what this Lombok is capable of doing. Then for configuration handling and mapping, I'm using an API called as owner API, which is again a very good API for handling multiple configuration files and mapping those configuration fields with the corresponding methods, which you can directly make use of without having to write statements like properties and that load properties and all those things. All right, then Google Juice is what I'm using for dependency injection. Usually, if you're familiar with Cucumber, you might have heard about Pico container that can also be used, but I found Google Juice more expressive and more rich in functionalities. You can also use Spring framework or dependency injection, auto-wire annotation. That can also be an option, but I chose to use Google Juice here, which is actually in the middle of in terms of complexity compared to Pico container. So it's better with the better than Pico container, and it's a bit more easier than Spring dependency injection framework. Now AssertJ is what I'm using for assertions. You can also use Hemcrest. I choose AssertJ, which has a more fluent interface compared to Hemcrest. But if you're using API or using Rest Assured, you have no option other than using Hemcrest, because Rest Assured comes with the Hemcrest matchers. Last and not the least is the extend report, Grasshopper Cucumber 6 adapter for reporting. So I'm using extend report, but an extension of extend report is provided to us by a team called as Grasshopper, and this library you can use, which has the capability to generate your extend reports without you having to write a single statement. So it maps it with the Cucumber steps, and Cucumber default method default interface and object scenario dot log is being picked. Whatever you write under scenario.log, whatever you write under scenario.attach, it will pick it up and generate a report for you and embed that information in the report. So that also I will show. Now, instead of walking you through this document, I would rather go to the actual implementation of it. So I'll start with the Lombok part, these libraries, and then I will talk about the subsequent proposals which I have here. So let me open my framework here. So this is what I have created. As I said, this is also located in my GitHub repository, which is present here. So I will just open this as well, just to demonstrate what we have here. This is where it is. You can download it. I have put some text here as well to explain what this is. You can clone or download this. Let me go back here. So this is how the framework looks like. I have one feature file here. I have written a feature file in Cucumber. So I'm using Cucumber with TestNG here. So I'm using Cucumber feature file like this, writing these statements, these test cases, and marking them as smoke and regression, so that I could demonstrate the execution flow. All I've written is these 4 test cases which deals with Amazon.in website. Now I'll go to the POM file to show what libraries I am using. So I'm using Cucumber TestNG implementation, Cucumber with Java, Cucumber with TestNG. Then I'm also added this dependency of Cucumber Juice, which gives me the dependency injection capability. And if with this, I also have to add Google Juice library. Then I have added Lombok, and then I'm using extend report Cucumber 6 for reporting purposes, AssertJ for for assertion library, and then log4j dependencies here. And last is our my owner API, which is there for mapping the properties file with the corresponding method. So that I'll show first. So I have my property files here. Now the way to use or way to access these properties, usually what we use is typically properties, and we create properties class and object, and then we load this file, and then we make use of get property method to fetch the properties at runtime. But there is better way of doing it, and it's a very rich API. As I said, it's owner API, and what it does is it maps the properties with the corresponding methods, and all you have to provide is the sources where you are fetching it, and you can provide multiple property files here. So it will fetch it from all the property file and merge it and map it with the corresponding method. You also have the option to provide the default values. Basically, you can provide default value. Let's say if someone is not sending anything from property file, you can send a default value set here so that it doesn't give you a null pointer exception. And how to make use of this is, for example, if you need if you need to have browser app URL inside your project, just for an example, you can just create the object of core config, which I've already created somewhere here, and all you have to do is to say core config dot, and it will give you the methods, and you can call these methods to fetch the value. So you don't have to do that properties dot get property, and rather you are actually relying on these methods, which will give you the property values. And it is, as I said, it's a very rich, lot of things can be, lot of use cases can be handled from here. I will actually show its documentation as well. So I think it should be here. So this is the official documentation of owner API, and it has hell lot of stuff. So I recommend go through this for all your configuration needs. Now I'll go back to the framework. Now next is the runner file, which I'm using here. So as you see, I'm using TestNG for my with Cucumber and with my Cucumber framework, and I'm not using Cucumber JUnit. The simple fact behind this is why I'm not using Cucumber with JUnit is because Cucumber with JUnit gives me only a single option. That is, if I want to execute my feature files, if I want to execute my scenarios in parallel, I'm not able to do that when I using Cucumber JUnit. Because Cucumber with JUnit only gives you option to execute your feature files in parallel and not the scenarios in parallel. And if I use Cucumber with the TestNG, then I am also able to execute my scenarios in parallel in multi-threaded environment, and that gives me a faster execution feedback loop. That is what really I want. So that's the reason I'm using the only reason I'm using TestNG here is because I wanted to execute my scenarios in parallel, which I'm not able to do when I'm using Cucumber with JUnit, because that only allows feature files to be executed in parallel, and the execution will be slower when you use Cucumber with JUnit. So my recommendation here will be go with Cucumber with TestNG. And all I have done here is my runner file, I have extended this with this abstract TestNG Cucumber test class, and then I'm overriding this method and marking this as parallel true. If you don't do this, then it will not execute things in parallel. And since the reason I put parallel is equal to true, that's the reason I'm able to execute all the feature files in parallel. And you can control this from the POM file as well. You can control it from configuration from Maven. So you can send this how many thread count you need. By default, thread count is always 10, but you can change its values. You can say 20, 30 based on your system resources, and it will execute that many threads for you. That many scenarios being executed in parallel for you. All right, so this is about runner file. Now I'm using typical page object model file here, and nothing special to explain in this case. Rather, I will focus next on the concept of test context. So I have created this test context class, which I'm kind of injecting in each of my step definition files. And how it really works is, when you have this multiple step definition files as the glue, and you write a method, you write or declare a class and you append or you add at the rate inject, and on top of it, at runtime, Cucumber creates the object of test context and injects it inside a step def, so that the all the step defs present here, all the files which is present inside a step defs has the same instance or reference of this variable. So this is similar to if I write new test context. Now only difference is if you do this and you do a new test context here, the reference of this will only be present inside this class. That means if I want to make use of this in other class, I will not be able to do it. And if I, instead of doing this, if I say inject, here also a new instance is being created and being injected in your step definition files. But in this case, the same reference, so focus on this, I'm emphasizing on this point, the same reference is being available in all the step defs classes. That's the whole and sole purpose of having this. So this is a concept of dependency injection, specifically in test automation, where you want a situation where, for example, you are doing something here and you have changed the state of the object here, and you want to retain the same state into a different method of a different class in a same scenario, right? And this, I mean this statement which I just said could be a bit twisted, but the simple example could be your driver object, right? So when you create a driver at some file and you are doing something with the driver, you want the same driver to be available in next class, in the next method of that class within the same scenario, for example, or even the different scenario. So you want to, so concept of dependency injection, just to put in a very simple term, is to sharing the state. So I want to share the state of my objects basically, without having to go and create the objects by myself using new keyword. I am making use of this keyword called as inject. This is given to me by Google Juice. By Google Juice is what is I'm getting it from. And in the case of Spring, you will use something called as AutoWire, and Spring also supports injection from the constructor. So does Pico Container. In Pico Container, it's a bit less intrusive because you don't have to use any annotation. You can just pass it via the, you can pass it via the constructor. And I'm also using it for test context as well as for any page objects. So all the page objects which I'm going to be using here, I'm injecting it here in the step defs. And if I have multiple step def file, I will also inject a write statement like this there as well. And just to emphasize again, it will inject the same reference. Imagine it's the same, exactly the same object present in all the step definition file. So if you change something here in some of the method, the same effect, the same object will be present in any other method of any other class. So this is just another way of I mean, for now, I think a lot of people, what they do is they create a base step defs basically, and then they put these reusable objects like driver and page objects and define it there, and then they make use of them in multiple classes. Sometimes they mark it as static as well, public static, which is not really good approach when we talk about parallel, because these things might break when you start executing things in parallel. So this is the way to handle it. Now, what is the content of test context? So I'll just go inside this. All I'm doing here is the most, first and foremost, the driver. The driver is the most important commodity in any of the test automation frameworks. You have to manage it in a very, very, you have to, I mean, it's very crucial, and you have to manage it in a, um, guys, give me a minute. Okay, sorry for the interruption. So, yeah, so as I was saying, driver is the very important commodity of any test automation framework, and I am putting it here under test context. And this test context I am making available to all the step definition file, and so with it, I'm also giving an access to the driver. Okay, because driver is actually, test context is composed of driver. Driver is located inside, it's a part of test context, which is actually I am injecting everywhere. And this is the test context has methods of invoke driver, navigate to browser, quit driver, etc., which manages the invocation as well as the life cycle of the driver. And I'm also putting something called a scenario object here, which is nothing but the native it is coming from the Cucumber. It's an interface which is again can be injected at using the hooks, which I'm actually using, making use of here. So in the step defs, I'm injecting this. Cucumber is injecting the scenario object here. This is Cucumber's dependency injection framework, by the way. This Cucumber creates this object at runtime and injects it in via its hooks. So once this is injected, then I'm capturing it and setting it inside my context. Okay, which again I am injecting here using this inject keyword. uh, Once it is set, my test context will have this scenario, and then I can make use of this scenario object for logging as well as attaching the screenshots. So I'll jump on to explain one more concept here called as driver. So in the case how you manage the driver, if you remember, I was also talking about I was also talking about how to manage the driver. So for that, I am using a factory pattern, something similar to factory pattern. I would say not exactly factory, but something similar to that, or rather very similar to that. So I have this driver factory with a static method, create instance, and based on what browser name and what execution type I am passing here, based on that, it will generate the um, uh, create the driver object and return it. So I am using this Firefox and Chrome implementation, and based on what type I'm passing here. So if you see, I have two interfaces here, basically two arguments: browser names, either Chrome or Firefox, and execution type, either it's local or on grid. So it supports both local execution as well as grid execution. I'm going to show the grid in a while, how we implement grid and how can grid can be used. So this is nothing much to explain here, I would say. It's typically use desired capabilities to say whether it's a Firefox or it's a Chrome. You define your properties, your options. In the case of Chrome, you define Chrome options and all. And then here all I'm doing is to say if the type is execution type is grid, then invoke remote WebDriver and fetch the URL from Selenium Grid URL. So you remember uh, we had mapped these property files from core config property files. We mapped it with the corresponding methods here, right? So we have this grid URL which is mapped to method Selenium Grid URL, and which I am actually making use of here. So I'm saying config.selenium grid URL. By the way, this config is coming from where? This is coming from uh, let me check once again. Sorry, I lost the track. So this config is coming from driver manager, where I have written something like this. Okay, so it's from here it is basically coming, and at runtime it is, when I'm saying config.selenium grid URL, it is giving me the URL, and then the driver will be invoked in the remote web driver that is in the Selenium Grid, which I'll show you in a while. Now, next part here is the interaction library which I have created here. So this is just a library which I have uh, written, a small library to perform the operations, because the responsibility of a framework or the framework writer or framework developer is to provide the ease of creating the test cases, and that too quickly. And so once you provide this as a part of the framework, the test case writer who is going to use the or test automation engineer who is going to be using your framework, he should find it very easy to use and to perform the operations to interact with the browser. And these such kind of in such kind of libraries are very handy in doing that. So when he or any automation tester wishes to click on an element, he need not worry about whether element is present there. So he writing the web conditions there, web driver waits there. It should be part of the method. So click element, if you notice, have this responsibility of waiting for the element, and only then it will go and click on it. It will, as well as it will log it. So if you see in all my page object model files, I'm directly using click elements here. And this interaction, I'm making this available via inheritance. You may change the approach. You may say this is not the right way, because usually in general inheritance is not favored, composition is more favored compared to inheritance. So if you want to create an object of interact and then want to interact with it, then want to perform operations, it's also fine. But I'm just making use of interact here so that I don't have to create the object. I can just call it because it's available here. And the driver is also, created this test context at the top here, which is the holder of my is of my driver. And I'm also doing one more step here, just worth mentioning is in my usually in the typical page object model file, you usually what you see here is driver, and driver you assign it with what is present here. But rather than doing that, I have created this abstraction of test context. So test context is contains my driver, and for any purpose where I have to get my web driver and make use of it, I will always refer to one single object, that is test context, which has everything. So test context, in this case, in my case, I have a driver, scenario, and config. So if I want to get config anywhere in my code, I will always use test context.core config. If I need driver, I will always use test context.driver. If I all anyway and want to log or take a screenshot, I always use test context.scenario. So that is the um, purpose of having this test context. And you can include more and more things inside this if you want to have something which needs to be available in any of your step definition files or any of the class for that matter. So this acts as a thing. This is a glue. It's a binding force which connects the whole uh, all the files, all the Java files in your framework. And I think this is a powerful idea, and I find it very useful. I have created a lot of frameworks considering this idea. It's even from the scalability perspective, it comes very handy, and it gives very ease of use to all the child frameworks which use this framework, all the child projects where the test automation engineers are supposed to be writing the test cases, and they don't get confused on what is where. They need to know is test context, whatever they need, configuration, scenarios, screenshots, logging, driver, everything is present inside test context. That's a single point of reference for all what you need to write an or automated test case using a framework. That's the idea which this is, and it's very useful. I find it very useful, and that's what it is doing. So in this case also, I'm using this test context, and if I want to take a screenshot, I'm also using test context. So I'm saying screenshot, and then context dot get driver. I'm getting the driver. I can even move this thing as a part of the context. And something to notice here is how I am attaching it, right? So I'm taking the screenshot, but then I'm attaching it using context, which is this object, get scenario, and then I'm attaching it. And the effect it will take is that once for each step, after each step, I'm taking this. So after each step, it will take the screenshot, and it will create this extend report. I'll show you that. Open in Chrome. So this is being generated by Grasshopper extend report. This is actually extend report only. It's extension. Grasshopper, as I said, is a team who extended this extend report and created this kind of adapter where you don't have to write the extend report statements. And if you see, the test cases look like this. And for after each step, it has taken a screenshot and attached it here. So this is a blank one, I think. Yeah. So for each step, it is attaching it, and you don't have to do anything else in the code except to write such kind of statements. So you say context get scenario attach, it will attach, and that's it. Because I'm not writing any extend report statement anywhere in my code, it is being automatically handled for me. If I want to write specific log somewhere, all I have to do is I will just say context, or rather you can just see here context dot get scenario dot logs, and this will log the statements. That's what it does. You see these statements which I'm putting here, these are generated by context.getScenario.log, and then the statement, it is logging it here. And these statements which is given, these are all already being automatically being picked up from my feature files, which is being executed. So that this functionality is what is given to me by this extend report adapter. So I'm using extend report Cucumber 6 adapter here, and links for all this for further understanding of it is also present. I have also made it part of this article basically. So You can actually go and have a look. For example, dependency injection, you can go and have a look in these articles. Better to go through it first if you don't understand what dependency injection is and why we actually make use of it. It's a very good explanation on why you need it and how you implement it. uh, Similar to that, even this Cucumber state sharing, like why you need it, because a lot of frameworks, I've seen a lot of frameworks are built without using any dependency injection. You're making use of some static base class or static instance variables there, which is not really good approach. So from here you get to know why you need that. Okay, I'll go back. And for Cucumber and TestNG parallel execution, this link is very useful. I'll show you the execution of Cucumber with TestNG in a while. And another link here for owner API, you have link here, go through it. For reporting, you have link here. So this is what the extend report looks like. Extend report Cucumber 6 adapter documentation, what to do, how to implement it and all. So it is a good document. I actually make use of this to implement it in this framework, so you can follow the same. And something to notice here is that to make this extend report Cucumber work, you have to have these two files as well here. So this is your extend report, and this is extend report settings. By the way, you can control how, where, and how it should attach the screenshot and all those things. You can control it from here. And this extend config XML also has to be there, so that you can it can that the adapter can actually read this and generate the report. uh, all right, then last is a configuration file which I have here for log4j. So I've written this configuration file. It has two formats which you can use. So right now I have made my appender as a rolling file. So for each execution, it generates a new execution file. But you can stop doing that and you can have just one log file for every execution, everything dumped into one. So it's up to you how you want to do it. So it is a rolling file concept here, which I have tried to put here. So rolling file is for each execution, it will generate a new one, a new file. This is what is achieved by rolling file. All right, this is this. Let me see if I've missed anything. Okay. So yeah, for logging, yeah, one more important point here that which I missed to talk about, that is log4j as well as Lombok, right? So Lombok, as I said, is used for injecting the code which you really don't want to write, and it clutters your code, also called as boilerplate code. So such kind of examples are like getter setters. When you want to write getter setters, for example, the test context, I wanted this scenario to be available without me making it public, right? So I put here this annotation getter setter, which I'm getting from where I'm getting from Lombok. And if you notice, I have been using this getter setter in here. So example, when I say context.get scenario method, this is being injected by these getter setters. And this may not work for you if you don't have this plugin installed. So you have to do two things here. First, you have to add the Lombok dependency here. But other than that, you also have to make sure that in the your IntelliJ or your Eclipse, you install the Lombok plugin from file settings and plugin. Then it will start working for you. Then I'm also using this Lombok annotation log4j2. This helped me in injecting the logger statement. You see, for generating the logger, this log.debug, this is object which is being injected by Lombok, which I'm actually can be will be able to. This is injected at the compile. When the code gets compiled, it's being injected then and there, and then it compiles with that code. Uh, it also, so that boilerplate code having to write statement get logger, logger dot get logger, and all those things need not be there in all the classes. You can just annotate it with this. So this is the advantage of using log4j, so that you have the code which makes sense without cluttering your code with unnecessary getter setters and all those things. And I was in the beginning, I was talking about a builder pattern, if you remember. So builder I'm not using right now, but in the coming videos or next an extension on this framework, I'm planning to extend this framework to add more and more features. You might see that as well. Usually use it for mostly in the API cases. When you want to automate API, you want to send the requests, and you want that request which you're sending is of complex nature with lot of permutation combinations. So best way is the builder, and I've seen people using templates, string templates, and replacing string templates. My opinion, not a good approach, because that is not very flexible approach. It's always, builder is always a better way of creating the objects or complex objects, in so to say, to send as a request payload, which we will be talking about later. All right, this was this. This one more important point here is scenario scoped. So this is again coming from Cucumber Juice implementation. Now the importance of this is that when I say it is a test context is a scenario scoped, what I mean is for each scenario, this object will be created, and once test case or scenario gets over, it gets destroyed. So that is what I have using it for, because my opinion and my understanding is always that each scenario should be independent of other scenario. Usually this is also an approach which people take when they write their test cases, that okay, I open the browser, I do something here, and then I will make use of the same state of the browser in the next test case. That means this test case will be dependent on this test case, which is not really good approach. You might feel that my I am saving something. That means I am saving myself from opening and closing the browser, and it's consuming time, so I'm saving myself from it. But actually it's a bad thing to do, because then you risk cascading, because if this fails, all the subsequent test case will fail with it, right? So it's not a good idea. Always, if this test case should be independent of this test case, and this is also how you can achieve faster execution, because if this test case is dependent on this test case, then both of them cannot execute in parallel, right? Because this has to be executed first and this has to be executed next. So it's always no matter where, because in test engine you have this mechanism of priority and ordering. I'm not for it. It's a bad approach, my opinion. 99% cases you always have to follow the individuality of the test case, modularity of the test case. If the test case is there, it should be independently executed. So if that has to happen, you have to provide this it a driver of its own, a resource of its own. Most important commodity in any test automation, UI test automation, is the driver. So driver, it should own the driver should be created for each test case, should be destroyed for each test case. So this is what this test context scenario scoped is doing. So for test context contains the driver. So what I'm trying to say by saying scenario scoped is that as soon as a scenario is created, execution gets started, it should create the scenario, sorry, create the test on context, as well as the moment it gets over, it should destroy the test context, so that we don't run the risk of leaking this test context state across multiple scenarios. So that's the reason I'm putting scenario scoped here, as well as I can also put scenario scoped on top of all the injected classes. So I'm also saying common page objects inject, so it's better I also put this on top of my class. Okay, so this is this. Now last is how will I execute this in a grid. So let me first execute this in let me execute this in Maven in a local environment. So if I want to execute this in parallel, I will simply say Maven clean install. Oh, started failing. Okay, I need to pass some arguments, I think. It's been a week I created this, and I think I forgot what arguments to pass here. I did write it somewhere if I'm not wrong. Okay, how to trigger the back grid is there, but I want to run it locally, so I will use this command. So I have to pass Chrome and execution type. So I have to say my execution type as this. So I'm saying Chrome and local, and it should execute my scenarios in parallel. Again, there are errors. Let me check again, something is not right. I think the problem was WebDriver, Chrome driver. I have placed my driver here now. And if I run it again, let's see if it runs this time. I think it's a success. Yeah, it has started the four browsers because I have four scenarios in parallel. Now, this, as I said, TestNG has this advantage of executing the scenarios in parallel in a multi-threaded environment. This is not really possible in the case of JUnit with Cucumber, because it can only execute feature file in parallel. And I have this feature, only one feature present here. I have only one feature present here and I have four scenarios in it. TestNG is able to do execute these four scenarios in parallel, but JUnit will not be able to do. And that's a challenge with JUnit. So I always favor Cucumber with TestNG compared to, and in TestNG, if I'm saying TestNG, I'm not using any other feature of TestNG, and I really don't want to do that because that would again will be a mix up between a TestNG and Cucumber, and it adds up to the complexity. And I'm using Cucumber framework. Sticking to Cucumber framework features and only using TestNG for parallel execution. TestNG comes with hell lot of other features, but I don't want to mix things up, and I would recommend not to do that and not start using TestNG hooks as well and TestNG XML as well, and then it will be messy. um, of course, if you are good with it, maybe you can go and give it a try, but my suggestion is always to keep things simple and stupid, okay, as the principle goes as well. All right. So this is how you execute it in parallel in local environment. Now, next is grid. How to do that in grid. For that, it's better I record a separate video just to explain how to execute this in grid. Because for that to happen, you also need to set up grid first. And how to set up grid is what I'm going to explain next. And this time, this grid is not the typical grid which you have seen so far. It will be a dockerized grid. Dockerized grid is what I'm going to explain, and how to make it running in your own local environment. So stay tuned.